The other day, I was enjoying a nice plate of some delicious cheesy mac and cheese. I mean, it was all over my beard and my mustache. I was essentially just enjoying life. It was a breeze, and then my youngest baby decided to stick his entire hand into my mac and cheese. And I should clarify, he didn't do this with the objective of actually feasting on the delicious meal. He just did it for the sake of knowing what mac and cheese feels like on his disgusting little tiny hand. That's what being a parent is like. If you don't have children, just be cautious, okay? Be prepared to have delicious meals ruined. But all jokes aside, in today's video, I thought we would talk a little bit more about the DC Collectors line. This is actually kind of a subline from the DC Multiverse that McFarlane came up with about a couple of years ago, and the reception, I think, has mostly been mixed. There are people that absolutely love stuff like this, and there are people that just completely incessantly bash McFarlane. And look, to each their own, but I've said this before, if the price point makes sense for the amount of product that you're receiving, I'm all for collector's edition lines or deluxe lines. We know that Marvel Legends tried this a couple of times already, but to me, they've been absolute misses for the most part, and it has a lot to do with the fact that they didn't throw enough in there, or the character really wasn't worthy of a deluxe release. The first one, I believe, and I'm not including the bigger figures that are technically like build-a-figures and then later get released as deluxe figures. I'm only talking about the figures that are just regular 6-inch 1/12 scale action figures that get deluxe offerings. I think the first one was the Black Widow Target exclusive action figure, which came with an action figure stand. It came with some blast effect pieces that could actually be ported onto the stand, as well as a plethora of different accessories. It was somewhat well received. Eventually we ended up seeing it online for like $15-13 on sale pretty consistently, and I thought it was a great deal because you could essentially get the action figure stand thrown in there, and you can never have enough action figure stands. I mean, just ask me. I love putting my Spider-Man poses or my Spider-Man in some web swinging poses. I love my Batmans to be gliding. I love my Supermans to be floating in midair. That's just the way that I am. I'm a simple man. And well, action figure stands, you definitely need plenty of those. And I felt like even if you didn't want the Black Widow figure, the action figure stand was well worth it. The little accessory pieces or the blast effect pieces that you could port onto the stand, I think were a brilliant touch from Hasbro. They essentially did the same thing, you know, to an extent with the Spider-Man Gamerverse not too long ago, but that had a bunch of issues. It was still using the windowless packaging. There was no action figure stand, and all of the webbing accessories were essentially just reused from older Spider-Man figures, so it really made no sense. There was nothing really new or innovative. I think the body mold might have been using the newer body mold, the Renew Your Vows, or at least one of the newer ones with the new tech and the new articulation points, but still it was a pretty hefty price to pay for just essentially a regular Spider-Man with a bunch of web accessories. I think it ended up retailing for 25 or 35, and then with taxes it was almost like $40. Personally, I thought it was a little bit overpriced, just in my personal opinion. I know it still sold pretty well within certain circles, and I think the third-party sellers are probably going to make a decent profit, because I do see eBay sales starting to kind of peak up there. I've seen them for as high as like $50 to $60. Only time will tell. But that's just a couple of examples of Hasbro trying their hand at kind of like a collector's edition line. Like I said, McFarlane has now been recently doing some stuff, and honestly, this entire video is just kind of me taking a look at it and wondering whether it's getting better or not. We talk about some of the older figures, for example, the Penguin figure, which I mistakenly assumed that this was a brand new body mold, but then I remember there being a video game version of this particular Penguin, just because it had, I believe, a new head sculpt, if I'm not mistaken, and then it had like the umbrella accessory, and I think that was, or the cane accessory, and that was it. That's all the figure came with. There was nothing else for that $30 price point on a reused body sculpt. I think the only real concept here was it was a classic Penguin. People were gonna want to pay for this figure because he's one of the main DC Batman villains, and it made perfect sense for them to hike up the price. And I'm assuming it's still sold pretty well. I remember seeing it sell out on, through certain retailers. But it was just interesting to see McFarlane try to abuse the DC Collectors line this way. I think the Abyss action figure also, now that one I think was all brand new sculpt work and a brand new weapon accessory, but still, I don't think that because an OM is giving you a brand new body sculpt that you should have to uppay for it. That makes no sense. I don't think you should be paying premiums for new body molds or new accessory pieces. Now, there are some pretty interesting reveals or releases that kind of toe the line between the action figure actually being worth it and not really worth it in my book. I think the perfect example is that new Grid Collector's Edition McFarlane action figure. Now, I'm trying to remember if this comes with any new sculpt work. It may, but it may be using some of like the Brainiac action figure body mold pieces, maybe for the chest piece or the legs. But that's really irrelevant here. Even if this was brand new molding, it's kind of towing the line there. This is a $30 figure. Now, this is a pretty hefty, big figure. I've actually seen this in person and it does look pretty cool. It is missing obviously paint. The sculpt work is phenomenal, but the paint just isn't there in my personal opinion, and especially for a collector's edition line where you're paying the premium to have something that's, collector friendly, and I don't feel like that necessarily scratches that itch if you're a hardcore collector. We also recently received that Batman as Green Lantern collector's edition figure. That one came with a couple of those like green accessory pieces, 6 hands total, and then the Green Lantern itself. And personally, I think most of these accessories were reused from some older Green Lantern figures, if I'm not mistaken. They just switched up the color tone. And then, while the Batman is essentially reused, I think maybe the hands and the head sculpt maybe were new to an extent. But it's yet another one of those figures in the collector's edition line that makes you wonder whether it was worth paying that $30 price point, because we have seen a lot of these from the DC Multiverse line that have close to as many accessories, maybe not as many, but close to that, where you get maybe like 6 hands total and then a couple of extra like batarangs or a grapple hook for a Batman action figure. I hate to revert back to it, but the first appearance Batman, I believe, came with like 6 hands or 4 hands total, and then a few extra accessories with a wired cape. So it really makes you wonder where that extra money is going, or where that extra budget is supposed to be going for these figures, because you can't really see it. Now, this one, like I said, kind of towing the line. It's closer to the $30 price point in value, but it makes you wonder whether you should be paying the extra $5 for the collector's edition line. Now, I could throw up about like 5 to 6 different examples of the DC collector's edition line being an absolute joke. There are definitely figures out there that I don't feel like deserve that $30 price point. There just aren't enough accessories. It's not a brand new sculpt. And like I said, these are just 2 prime examples of that. However, there have been some absolute bangers released within like the last year or so, and I do feel like the line is going in the correct direction. We have, for example, the Captain Boomerang action figure, which, as is the case with almost every DC figure that McFarlane has released, there was an alternate version, or the Chase Platinum version that McFarlane likes to refer to it as. But the original one, or whichever version you got, came with a wired jacket, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. It also came with 6 hands total, as well as 2 boomerangs. And then obviously that beautiful cart stand that everybody just loves, right? No, not really, but you were getting the soft cloth jacket with the wire, along with a couple of extra few accessories. Now, I will say it was kind of weird that they decided to throw so much of the budget at this particular figure. I mean, Captain Boomerang is a semi-interesting villain, but he's not necessarily like a marquee one. So it's kind of interesting to see them pour that much time and effort into this particular character. But then we just recently got another prime example of the DC Collector's Edition line actually being absolute fire. We had the Dark Knight Returns battle damaged Batman, which is supposed to come with 6 hands total, an extra head sculpt, and then like a lamppost that is supposed to be like a display piece. Really cool to see something like that. It's definitely thinking outside of the box. Usually McFarlane would throw like a Build-A-Figure piece for a Build-A-Figure wave, or potentially throw like a comic book for the page punchers line. But instead of doing something like that, he's adding more value to the collector's display, and I think that's a phenomenal idea. It is also worth mentioning that this, at least from the promotional images, does not appear to be a faceplate. This is an actual head sculpt, which makes me believe that he did that just in case you want to like switch out the head sculpts with the older version, because I'm going to assume and go out on a limb here that this particular body mold is just a reuse from the original release, which was the horse Build-A-Figure. And so it's really cool that he's deciding to do that, because he could have easily done the face sculpt or the face plate technology for this particular release, but it's just an extra nice little touch to give even more value. You can kind of swap out the head sculpts, I believe only for the chase variant, however, because the chase one is the one that is the black and gray, whereas in the regular release is going to be the blue and gray. And it's also building on a display, because we, for most of us that are big Dark Knight collectors, we already have this entire wave. We already have the horse, and we have, every version that they've released thus far. I believe the armored Batman is also another big release for this particular wave or this particular universe. So it makes perfect sense for him to continue to build on that. And now we get yet another version of Batman, and you can kind of alternate between the two, or just make one Batman your go-to for the display. If I'm able to get my hands on this battle damaged one, obviously that's going to be my stand-in. And then we just recently got a look at that Reeves Superman, which again, phenomenal job when it comes down to display options. He's giving you about 10 hands total, or 5 pairs of hands, the wired cape with obviously the cloth wired cape, and then the extra head sculpt with an action figure stand for $30. Now I will say the hand options, I don't know if we need that many. I know it's pretty cool because it's somewhat accurate to the source material, but at the same time, I don't know if we need that many, especially for a Superman action figure. I probably only need like the open palm flying hands as well as fisted hands, and then I'm good. I don't necessarily feel like I need this many display options when it comes down to hands. I would much rather have like another display piece somewhat similar to the lamppost for the Batman. Maybe if they did something similar to that for this Superman, maybe like a giant block of ice, or maybe an updated action figure stand, because we all know these McFarlane stands are not perfect. But as I said, this one has value. There's a reason that it's $30. It's not just a regular $22.99 DC Multiverse reveal, and it makes way more sense. Same thing with the page punchers. I mean, not everybody is into comic books, and so sometimes some of those DC page punchers don't make a lot of sense at retail, and we have seen a lot of them end up being peg warmers and then eventually going on clearance, 75 to 80% off from their original price point. And then finally, we do have the Sergeant Rock and the Huntress action figure, which both came with quite a few different accessories. And then we finally saw some of the female characters actually getting some hardcore love. That definitely came out wrong. It gets your mind out of the gutters, but you get where I'm going. We finally got a cloth wired cape for a female character, and then extra face plates, 6 hands total, as well as that crossbow shooter. I just think there was a ton of value there, and I'm hoping that eventually we get another classic Wonder Woman. I think that's the figure that everybody's looking for. The DC Collector's Edition line completely, the first release sold out incredibly quickly, and then now at the third party you would probably have to pay like almost $100 for that figure. So hopefully we're able to get something like that soon. And I'm hoping the community itself shows a little bit of love to the female characters, because if they sell well, McFarlane is going to continue to go back to them. He's often made that point, or emphasized that point, that a lot of the female characters just don't sell well. The numbers just don't add up. And that's one of the main reasons that not only does he not release enough female characters, but a lot of them are very lackluster. And if we continue to support McFarlane with these female characters, maybe we'll get some deeper cuts, maybe Poison Ivy, another version of Harley Quinn. Only time will tell. So in summary, just my personal opinion, I think the DC Collector's Edition line is getting better. It's definitely had some bumps on the road. We just talked about Penguin and a few other DC, quote-unquote DC Collector's Edition line figures that just did not make sense at that $30 price point. In some cases, we weren't even getting new body molds. Sometimes they were just really old and just had a new paint job and like maybe an extra accessory or a new head sculpt, and for that main reason you were paying $30. It just didn't make sense in my personal opinion. But it's moving in the correct direction, especially with that Dark Knight Returns battle damage figure. I think he's thinking outside of the box, being a little bit more creative, and that's all that we could ask for from the DC Collector's Edition line. I think that's one of those lines that can be a little bit more experimental because there's just so much room in the budget, and worst case scenario, you end up with a couple of extra weapons, a couple of extra accessories, maybe an extra head sculpt, or actually an action figure stand. We need more of those, okay, McFarlane? But this is just my personal opinion. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully you guys enjoy this type of content. If you guys do, make sure to stay tuned because we do upload pretty consistently. Stay safe out there, and as always, enjoy the hobby, pose your action figures, take photographs, just have fun with it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.